If ever there is a location outside of the Everfree, where the notion of losing your way and never being heard from again might hold some merit, this might well be it. Mount Everhoof and its surroundings are regarded as so dangerous, a permanent guard must be in place to ensure no one can go anywhere near the mountain. This is in spite of the seclusion and the low probability that anyone would be there in the first place. It is unlikely this would have concerned Chrysalis had she known. On a mission for the peak of Mount Everhoof, taking a solitary path along the way, she is forced by the mountain currents to journey via the forested slopes. No sooner does she set hoof within, that the sensation of being observed takes hold. She is being stalked by something strange and mostly unseen, that is rapidly encroaching from behind until it is almost right on top of her. Not inexperienced with such dangers, however, Chrysalis manages to drive the presence away, along with whatever fate may have been in waiting. In the aftermath of such an encounter, several questions remain unanswered. What force is it that resides within the desolate forests of the north? How long has it been around? Is it a local presence, or is it more widespread than we realize? And finally, does it ever pose a threat? Of the few observations recorded during the encounter, we know such an entity takes on the primary form of a shadowy, mostly shapeless essence, distinguished only by a large pair of glowing eyes. In initial sightings, such beings were shown to successfully render themselves nearly invisible, the only real giveaway to their presence being those eyes, and only when said eyes are open. Their presence is shown to have little impact on the environment around them, with barely a breeze resulting from their movements. There is quite a significant variation in size between such forms, the largest being roughly equal in size to an Ursa Minor. The smallest version might be estimated to be about the size of an equestrian pony, distinguished further by having mostly yellow coloration, with a red iris, while the opposite is true of their much larger counterparts. Such creatures were accompanied by animalistic or insect-like clicking and generated a high-pitched squeal or whimper in response to Chrysalis's defensive move. At the time, Chrysalis showed little concern regarding the larger being, despite its size and close proximity. This can either be due to the character having witnessed similar creatures prior, or due to a general lack of interest in regards to what said creature could have been. As for the question of whether such a form is known or unknown to the ponies of Equestria, the prevailing theory amongst the society is that such a creature is most likely unknown. So far, very few cases where similar such entities are described are ever brought up, and never are they described as scientifically recognized. This, however, is a topic for later in the video. There is a fact that must always be taken into account whenever analysis of a particular in-universe subject is required. That being that not everything that appears on screen should be taken at face value. It is not uncommon for the show to exhibit far more metaphorical representation of occurrences on screen, frequently presenting circumstances that occur from the character's point of view, without having an in-universe existence. A good example of such a phenomenon is a representation of Fluttershy's stage fright in Hurricane Fluttershy, where the visuals are seemingly filled in by the character's imagination. Therefore, it is possible the forces seen encroaching on Chrysalis during her encounter were merely a representation of an abstract concept, such as fear of the unknown and the impression of being watched. Such a possibility would make sense. However, the moment exhibited very little in the way of setup for such a likelihood. In the vast majority of such cases, it is usually made clear we are seen from the character's perspective, often up front. Here, however, there is no such transition. In addition to this, such representations usually line up with the character's personality. It makes sense for Fluttershy to see 1,000 eyes staring at her when she is established as being fearful of others watching her. However, it is harder to understand why Chrysalis would experience something similar when she is apparently unfazed by the location. It may well have been a visual metaphor, however the circumstances do not seem to correlate with such a likelihood. How about a hallucination? While not impossible, actually hallucinating to such an extent has never previously been established for this character, and again, there is nothing to indicate we are seeing from her perspective alone. It seems entirely possible, in fact likely, that whatever Chrysalis saw in that forest was very real. If we establish such a possibility, we are then left to ask ourselves what it intended by stalking Chrysalis. It may be, as the character partially indicated, that such a presence was specifically aiming towards inducing fear in the victim, either to drive them away, or to use said fear as a form of sustenance. There is, however, a much more disturbing possibility. It may be such an entity was predatory in nature, actively hunting Chrysalis for sustenance. In any case, such an instance gives us very little in the way of possible explanations. Based on what we know, what follows represent the most likely possibilities. It is possible such a creature may have simply been a large animal that was too obscure to identify, with the most likely example given the location being the Ophiurotaurus. The only large animal we have glimpsed from the area, the Ophiurotaurus, is a large chimera form blending the upper body of a bull and the hindquarters of a serpent. The creature bears eyes that closely match those of the entity. The only difference between the two is the iris, a feature that is non-existent for the Ophiurotaurus. While this is still theoretically possible, such a diagnosis relies on the assumption that the shadowy form of the entity was an illusion. If it was an ability inherent to the species, we would likely have seen it make a resurgence during the attack on Kozyglow and Tyrek. In addition, we know said creature does not travel silently, creating a slithering sound when in motion. Such a sound was nowhere to be heard from the entity. While a possibility, this one is far from backed up given the circumstances. That leaves us with these somewhat more unusual likelihoods. The subject of nightmares, or shadows, has previously been discussed in this series in relation to a similar entity. To summarize, a shadow is a spiritual life form with a constitution of enchanted fluid, usually a form of gas, that is sustained by negatively charged magic. In most cases, such creatures are parasitic in nature, developing within a specific host. There is room for speculation regarding whether such creatures are born internally or externally. However, their presence within Equestria cannot be denied. In addition to the show, the comic Fiendship is Magic Issue 1 introduced the Umbra, a being similar to the Shadow in general composition, of which the character of King Sombra was supposedly one of their own. Given how such beings were trapped under the Crystal Empire, it makes sense that something so similar would be present just north of the location. It may be such creatures were drawn to Chrysalis's aura of negative emotion and sought to either feed or infect. However, the similarities begin and end with the connection to darkness. Both shadows and the Umbra, those that have been observed, exhibit a somewhat fluid composition that appears to directly interact with the environment. The entities observed showed no signs of such interactions, implying little if any mass. Even whilst in a form that might be considered similar, King Sombra was always depicted as a black cloud of smoke rather than pure shadow. While the fact that such creatures occur in the comics implies their existence within a version of Equestria's universe, the mixed bag of show continuity makes it hard to determine whether such creatures even exist within the show timeline. While little is known regarding such life forms, the little we do know makes it hard to definitively classify the Everhoof Entities under such a category without further evidence. That leaves us with perhaps the most terrifying possibility. The shadow person, or shadow being, is perhaps one of the most prolific and fear-inducing paranormal entities in human experience. It can take on the form of a pitch-black silhouette or a shapeless mass that seemingly absorbs light. We know next to nothing about them, short of their fearful appearance. There is no real limit to where or when such forms can appear. However, they will often arise at the site of hauntings, including poltergeist activity, and often present themselves in cases of sleep paralysis. While most sightings perceive no visible features, some do describe a pair of glowing eyes, including both red and yellow. The closest possible explanation we have for such forms is the phenomenon known as pareidolia, wherein the visual centers of the brain form patterns based on what it finds familiar, creating features that don't always exist within the environment. Such an explanation may well be true of our world. However, as it stands, shadow beings may be the closest possible suspects regarding what the Everhoof Entities might well have been. A creature made of shadow that can appear anywhere, seemingly without affecting the environment around it, occasionally exhibiting a pair of glowing eyes. From here, there are a few other possibilities to follow up on in regards to identification. However, that still leaves us with one final topic of discussion: a creature remarkably similar to the entity witnessed around Mount Everhoof. A creature we may well have already seen for ourselves. You are probably already familiar with this creature, even if you have not seen our initial discussion on the subject. It is a creature that has haunted the back of our minds since Season 4, yet its effects may be far older. In the second episode of the entire series, we learned that the mysterious Everfree Forest may have had a history of disappearances. A history that, as of this video being released, is yet to be fully established. Perhaps then it should have concerned the society more, that 3 years later, a terrifying local legend would eventually be brought to the attention of viewers. At some point in the Everfree's history, ponies in the area supposedly encountered a strange entity, a creature initially believed to be the embodiment of dark magic, most frequently witnessed within the recently vacated castle of the Two Sisters. This thing was named the Pony of Shadows, quite possibly in allusion to the original bearer of said name. That is how the theory goes. As of right now, however, the entity remains a legend, or so it was believed. A factor that was not initially discussed by the society was the figure witnessed at the end of Castlemania. The main reason for this was the all-encompassing belief that such a form had to be a sighting of Tyrek in his weakened state. However, further analysis has indicated a number of flaws with such a likelihood, the most notable being the shadow-like nature of the figure, exhibiting an ability Tyrek has never subsequently shown to possess. As such, the prospect that the Pony of Shadows itself may well have been witnessed on screen becomes increasingly more substantial. Indeed, the idea of a shadowy form with relatively solid eyes seems to better reflect the nature of the entities glimpsed within the Everhoof Forest, the implication being that such forms may be of similar origin. The interesting thing is, this isn't even the only other time such eyes have been witnessed throughout the show. Numerous seemingly disembodied eyes were witnessed observing Pinkie Pie and Rarity from the shadows in It Isn't the Main Thing About You, even being acknowledged by Rarity herself. Something very similar occurred with the character of Scootaloo in Sleepless in Ponyville. There may well be other instances of which the society isn't aware of, and that is mostly due to the fact that such features are rarely given notice, regarded as merely background elements. Yet the fact that all such eyes are so remarkably similar raises a curious if not far-reaching possibility. Given everything we have seen, it seems highly possible that an unknown species exists within Equestria, on the very fringe of the reality we and the inhabitants might be familiar with. Perhaps there exists an ecosystem hidden in plain sight that occasionally, just occasionally, intercepts with the familiar. As of yet, however, much of this remains speculative. We don't know if the creatures seen by Chrysalis were truly literal in their existence. We don't know if they are truly dangerous, or if the encounter exhibited curiosity rather than threat. We don't know if such an entity has anything in relation to the various sightings. All in all, we just don't know. If such a needle of undiscovered truth exists, the likelihood is sadly quite high that any answers will likely forever remain hidden, lost within the endless uncertainty that a conclusion naturally brings. Whatever such forms may be, one cannot deny that the northern wilderness of Equestria gave up but a tiny portion of its secrets that day. What else might be hidden out there, amongst the beautiful yet treacherous snow-covered mountains, the frigid and constant winds, and the deep, untrodden woodland?
Hey again, everyone. I'm so sorry for the delay. I just... hang on. Yeah, that's better. That's right, I finally updated my OC. I'm so sorry about the delay. It's been quite a chaotic year, to be honest. I'm not sure if I'll get any more videos released. I hope I do, but that's not really the main priority right now. That being said, in particular, I am hoping on releasing a full video, in order to deal with the surprising amount of information I missed during the creation of the Bat Ponies episode. I'm really sorry. At the very least, I hope you enjoyed this latest episode. If you're still subscribed, well, thank you for sticking with me as long as you have. I really didn't have to. So, yeah, this is it. We're actually saying goodbye to Friendship is Magic. Well, for the TV series, at least. I mean, yeah, I know the fandom's going to be okay, but the show's been on for about a decade. Many members of the fandom may be too young to even remember a time when Friendship is Magic didn't exist. It's no small change, is it? But they do seem to be going out on a high note, which is always something I can appreciate. So, yeah, we'll see how this goes. So, yeah, thank you for watching, and very best.